Thank you. I'm so happy. Welcome to the best program of the year. It is a close second though. Whenever Jane broke, when you busted that block, I think that might have been a front runner this year too. So typically it's like a mixed bag. Lafe's like, what are you going to say about me? Because you all know he needs no introduction. So today, I'm just going to turn it back on you and say thank you to all of you because you all are very supportive. And I remember a couple of weeks ago when we came back from Grand Nationals, Dr. Miller made sure he came and got me and said he did a great job and make sure I told him. And like today, Loretta made a cake for the band and she actually is packing up some snacks on her behalf for the kiddos to take with them because they don't normally eat with us. But look, she's packing it up right now. And so each of you in here at some point, Jeff Fleming posts glorious, magical things on social media about the band, and each of you have done some part to play a role in the success and legacy of the band. So really today is a thank you, and this is just an opportunity to say that. I think you may not realize how hard it is to maintain this level of excellence. Lafe Cook makes it look so easy, and so I think that we should be mindful of how hard it is, just like Brian said, and thank you from the football parent perspective, of how hard it is to do that. So I thought I would leave you with this thought, just as Milton did. I'm not going to beat that, Milton. That quote is great, and I think speaks to Lafe Cook himself because he is very much about service to others and his students and his community. As we head into the centennial, we were kind of looking at it in three ways: past, present, and future. So this year, we are honoring all of our veterans. So if you apply that to band, Lafe Cook has established a legacy of excellence for a really long time that will, no matter what, going forward, will live on into perpetuity. That's how communities do things. We do things together. And so in Deborah's year, we're going to be celebrating the present, and service above self will be a big part of Deborah's year as president and everyday things that we do. And this year, in the present, we won Grand Nationals again. So we're doing good. And then if you think about the future, when I have the honor to be president, we're going to be focusing on our youth in the next 100 years. And the Dobyns-Bennett Band is coming up on their centennial in the school year of 26-27. So Lafe is doing a wonderful job over these next 5 years to develop this plan of what the next 100 years will look like for this community, for the Dobyns-Bennett Band. And I promise you, he will be retiring before the next 100 years. Mark my words, Lafe Cook will retire before the next 100 years are over. But today, just thank you for participating. Thank you for all the extra touches and the texts and the calls and the words of encouragement. They mean more than you know. They're extra special. And so today, thank you back to you all. We now introduce Lafe Cook.
I do love my job, and I do spend a lot of time working at it, but can you imagine coming home to that one and not being a hard worker? Like, what would my life be like if I came home every night and wasn't known to be someone motivated and working hard? That would be challenging, living with Heather in that scenario. Thanks, babe. And Heather's like, she doesn't work for the band. She isn't at band rehearsals, but she does she is a huge component of now how the community sees and views the band, because she does things like she just did, talks really positively about it. I appreciate that. And hearing the gentleman talk about how the district is blowing large metropolitan areas out of the water and you're giving, that doesn't surprise me, and it doesn't surprise you at all either. Our community has been that way since its inception, right? Interestingly, as he was speaking, that to me is an incredible parallel to the work these kids and the support their families give them and how they're able to continue to compete on the national stage. It's the same parallel. It's people in our region, and especially in Kingsport, I think, they just understand what it takes to support excellence and the work required to achieve it. When I tell, so Grand Nationals, Heather referenced that we won Grand Nationals. We didn't win Grand Nationals, that's very kind, but we did win our class. I'll explain a little bit about how Grand Nationals works. It's the only national band competition. I mean, it is the true national band championship. I think if if you're a cheerleader or a dance team, there's like 16 different things, organizations you can belong to. And in any given year, if you Google National Championship Cheerleader Squad, like 25 different schools will come up. In the band world, there truly is only one route to these national championships, and that's through what's called the Bands of America Grand Nationals. 120 bands perform at Grand Nationals. 2 days of prelims. 60 bands perform on Thursday, and another 60 perform on Friday. At the end of the 2 days of prelims, the top 30 scores perform in semifinals. And so we've been going to Grand Nationals, I don't know, for a while.
2008.
2008 was the first time we went. And in those days, we were not doing as well as we're doing now. But the reason we went was to show our kids that we need to benchmark our program against the best programs in the country. Dobyns-Bennett's been the best band in East Tennessee since the 40s, you know. And I found in my early years here especially, we would push the kids to be better, and then at halftime they would see one of the other regional bands that would be half our size and, you know, without the same resources. The kids would look at the other band at halftime and go, well, Mr. Cook, like, we're twice as good as that. Why are you yelling at me? You know, why are you pushing us so hard? And we found that was like really a stumbling block for us to get to the next place until we went to Grand Nationals. And so when we started competing in the mid-2000s, we were getting demolished. Like, you know, you hear all about the excellence of the band and its national exposure, but in those early years, we were getting our tails kicked. But our kids woke up, and our community and their parents, everyone looked up and said, okay, there is more. We can be more than we currently are. It is not just okay to be the best band in Northeast Tennessee, and it really made a huge difference. And so that's been kind of a multi-year climb to where the kids now can compete on the national stage. So I mentioned 60 bands each day in prelims, 30 bands make semifinals. So when we were making, in the days when we were only making semifinals, I would do a demographic analysis of all the school communities that were in semifinals, 30 schools in semifinals. And we would just, me and my assistants, we would just look up every one of those schools' cities and then look up their median incomes. And we put it in a spreadsheet. We did it every year. And every single year we've been, out of the 30 bands that make semifinals, Kingsport has been 30th in median income of those schools, every year. So then we started to make finals, and we've made finals 4 or 5 times. And I did the same thing, plug those schools. So 30 bands make semifinals. I'll stop moving, I'm frustrating Trey on the camera, sorry. 30 bands make semifinals, and then the top 12 out of those 30 make finals. That's like the gold standard, awesome thing you want to try and do. And so we've been able to do that 4 times. When you look at the communities that make finals, we're not just 12th, we're 12th by a long shot, and the only school from a town, a city. All those other schools who are making finals are from the affluent suburbs of huge metropolitan areas. Dallas, Texas, Houston, Texas, Austin, Texas, Indianapolis, Indiana. Without fail, we are the only band performing at that level that just comes from a city that isn't a suburb of somewhere bigger. And when you look at that and put in our median income and the diversity of our students economically, and if you're someone who's lived in Kingsport a long time, you may not have an awareness of how the demographic at Dobyns-Bennett has changed since your kids were in school at DB. Like, it's a very, very different school, still achieving at a remarkable level, especially when you consider the different kind of student that attends Dobyns-Bennett now. And that's just an evolution in our community, right? And I mean, if you live in Kingsport, I think you have an innate awareness that Kingsport's different than it was, you know, in the early 80s. But what you may not think about is how that trickles down to the school population. And so when you get an opportunity to ever intersect with a teacher at Dobyns-Bennett, you should pat them on the back. Because when you think about all the testing statistics, and our band is fortunate to be excellent, but our athletic programs continue to be powerhouses across the state. Our academic statistics are amazing, and as they have always been, but the demographic of the school is not what it has always been. And so I'm especially proud of our kids and the work they do, given the fact who their competitors are. The magical piece of that is this community, though. And it's the support that folks like you and lots of others around Kingsport give the kids, whether it's buying fruit that you don't really want, but you buy fruit from the band kids and it rots in your garage because you want to support the band, or it's coming to ball games, on a rainy night to see the kids perform at halftime, even though you could be more comfortable staying at home that night. It's all those kinds of things. And I think when I think about our band program and its sort of historic excellence, it's a recipe of ingredients, and I don't think I even know what they all are. I always worry that one of them will go away and I won't know it went. But we're very proud of the kids' work. We did not expect to be good this year. And that's because of COVID. I mean, we spent a whole Kingsport City Schools, in my view, behaved extraordinarily responsibly through the pandemic. I think that KCS did an amazing job of juggling a lot of opinions, right? And lots of folks who had differing views on how it should be handled, and I think we navigated through that better than most places. And a result of our navigating through the pandemic meant that for Dobyns-Bennett's band, we didn't do much in the fall. Like we didn't compete at all. We rehearsed very minimally. We had to rewrite all our formations on the field to where the kids were 6 feet apart, which is not normal. And in a band as big as ours, to try and put all 375 of them 6 feet apart, like we needed more yard lines, like it was really hard to do anything and play together and all that. When we would play inside those same numbers of kids, we were also required to sit 6 feet apart. And so we're trying, this group of students, 6 feet apart, wouldn't fit in this room, and then you're trying to teach them how to play together. We struggled. Many of our competitors this year, they didn't do any of that. The schools in Texas that we compete with, apparently there wasn't COVID in Texas last fall, because they just hammered right through as if nothing was going on. And so when we thought, okay, we have to jump back into the competitive pool, like our kids have lost a lot of institutional knowledge on how to be competitive at the national level. And so we were very honest with ourselves, and frankly the kids were like, we're going to go back to Grand Nationals. I don't know what will happen, but we need to all understand that most of our competitors just had a normal year, and we didn't. And so we might be a little bit behind those folks. And we were early, and our kids just rolled up their sleeves, and unbelievably, so when Heather references we won, all the schools that go to Grand Nationals are in classifications by their school size. And so the 120 down to 30 down to 12, that's a free-for-all. That doesn't matter what your band size is or your school size. But within the semifinalist 30 bands, that second round, they award championships by school size. Dobyns-Bennett, as big as Dobyns-Bennett is by Tennessee standards, and I think Dobyns-Bennett's maybe about the 15th largest school in our state right now, so it's big. But compared to schools in other states, Dobyns-Bennett is not big. And so we're in class 3A. The big class is 4A. And most of the bands at Grand Nationals are either 3A or 4A. And so we did not expect it at all when we won the national championship in our class. We weren't expecting to even make finals. And the fact that we made finals and also won the national championship in 3A, we were not expecting that. And our kids they just did the work, and very, very, very proud of them. We have navigated through the pandemic without really losing very many kids. And a lot of my colleagues across the country have seen their band programs dwindle, dramatically shrink. And it's been really exciting to see our kids stick with it. But high school kids have a big investment, right? If you've been in high school band even for 1 year, you've spent a lot of hours, and you're committed at that point. Middle school kids don't have that same level of time commitment. And middle school band is really, at the end of the day, just a class you take, right? Middle school by design is an opportunity for kids just to explore what they're interested in, and we've got kids in our middle school bands who play football and play clarinet and cheerlead and volleyball, they try it all. And we want kids to do that in middle school so they find what their passions are. At our middle schools, because of that different level of commitment, we lost a lot of students. At Sevier Middle School, the program cut less than half. Like it came down, well, they lost 80 kids at Sevier, just at Sevier in the band program. And so when I speak to, and that's no one's fault, it's just the difference in high school band and middle school band and the investment you have from a time commitment in it. But if you've been around the DB band a long time, will look normal next year. The next year, the DB band isn't going to look like it's looked. Now, we'll kick their tails, and we'll make sure it's real good, and we'll make sure that we're there on Friday nights supporting those hardworking football kids and representing our community. But I almost feel responsible to tell people, because you're going to show up at the first game and someone's going to ask, what has happened? And that's what happened, you know. Both our middle schools have new directors, and they completely understand this dynamic. And so what'll happen is those small 7th and 8th grade classes will come to us next year and then the next. But these new directors have huge 6th grade classes. Just in the 6th grade at Sevier, there's 100 kids. And just in the 6th grade at Robinson is another 100 kids. So this will be a blip this will be a moment in time. So if you just hang around through the small, I promise you we'll make sure we're good. It's just going to be a little smaller than it's been. And then in 3 years, it's going to be the biggest it's ever been. And so I don't know, I just don't want people to be surprised. I think even in the small years, we'll still probably be the biggest band in Northeast Tennessee. It just isn't going to be the 400-member behemoth that people are used to seeing. But I think that we've got a bright future coming out of that, you know. When I come to Rotary every year, I always ask what questions you might have about the band program, and I always get great questions. But before I put it up to questions, Heather, what have I left out that I should address?
Will you share about the show concept this year?
Oh, yes. I think one of the reasons our kids were nationally competitive in a year we didn't think they would be is because they really, really got wrapped around the program that we did. And I know a handful of you were there and have seen it. Knowing that I have to back up. So we have a team of designers who design our show, great people who put together, I have a person who writes the drill formations they do, and another person who comes up with the color of the flags and helps us pick the music. This show that we did this fall was actually written to be performed 2 years ago. And when the pandemic happened, we had this amazing show that we couldn't do because there weren't going to be national competitions, and we didn't want to waste it, if you will, on a year when we weren't going to be traveling all over and letting people see it. So we took our show and put it on a shelf for a year. But it was written for the kids I was going to have in the fall of 2020, right. And so here we are in the fall of 2021, and the show had been written, for example, the show had been written for 18 trombones and 12 baritones and 10 tubas. And a lot of those kids that were going to perform it in 2020 graduated. But the drill was still written for that exact instrumentation. So in addition to all the other challenges we were having, I had to go to kids and say, okay, you've got to learn you don't play the trombone, but you've got to learn to play the trombone so I can fill a drill slot. And you have to learn to play the trombone at a nationally competitive level. And you got about 2 months to do it. And that was happening all over our band. And so many of the students you saw perform this fall were playing a secondary instrument. And so when you factor, and again, none of my Texas competitor guys were having to do any of that. And so additional reason we were really proud of those kids. The show we called The Promise of Living, and the music was by Aaron Copland, who's probably the most famous American classical composer. He wrote Appalachian Spring, which you all know the melody to that. That's and so we use that in our show, and then we use The Promise of Living, which is from an opera that Copeland wrote that's also about Appalachia. The costuming was loosely Appalachian. The kids kind of wore farmer hats, and we had split rail fences, and the whole show was really about our region. And that was of course, by design. As I mentioned, we're the only nationally competitive band from Appalachia, period. Again, almost all those bands are from suburban metropolitan areas. And so as we started to talk to the kids about the fact, we talk to them all the time about how they're underdogs in this world. And then the fact that we could talk to them about how they come from a place that really isn't represented in the marching band world. They have a show that represents our community. They just started to really get into it. I guess it was about 2 weeks before we went to Grand Nationals, I put on Facebook, if you've got stories that I can share with our kids about your roots in our region, send them. Because I wanted to just read, because I know I've got a lot of kids who are, multi-generation Appalachian East Tennessee residents. And so I wanted some of their grandparents and parents to send me some stories. What I didn't envision would happen is the pictures that would come. So on Facebook, people started scanning picture after picture. I think in 3 days we had something like 250 pictures of the kids' great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents, all these amazing pictures and stories. And so on the day of finals, we printed them all out, and I had our people shrink them down to wallet size, and we just handed them to the kids to wear in their uniform for their finals performance. And I'm getting a little verklempt thinking about it. Seeing the kids react to that was unbelievable to me. And I think it's maybe what pushed us over the edge competitively, because they were so emotionally invested in representing their community in that moment. It was pretty special. It's embarrassing, sorry.
Choir.
Oh, and the one of the coolest things we did with the show was we added our choir students. And so marching band typically doesn't have voices, right? And so I went to our choir teacher and said, hey, all this music has words. Even though Aaron Copland, when he wrote the originals, when he wrote the orchestral stuff, didn't include voices. All of these pieces have words. And I asked our choir teacher, do you think you've got some kids who would be interested? And she said, oh, I love this idea, I'll ask them. And so her top 30 kids, just as a group, said, yeah, we'll do it. And so in addition to all the band kids, we had the 30 best singers at Dobyns-Bennett participated as well and sang huge chunks of the show, which also made us different than anybody else, which I think played a big competitive component.
Do other schools have voices?
I have seen it done once or twice with vocalists, like singular, like a soloist with marching band, but I'd never seen anyone do a full choir. It was incredibly challenging from a microphone standpoint, and that was a learning curve for us, and we had to invest a decent chunk of money into figuring out how we get those voices amplified so you could hear them over a marching band, right? But I had a great young graduate of Dobyns-Bennett who actually just randomly finished a master's in sound amplification design, and it's Carrie Upshaw, who was on our school board. Carrie Upshaw's son, when Carrie passed away, Jeff moved back to Kingsport to help his dad, just right at the moment where we needed someone on site. It's a God moment. Like, this person moved back to Kingsport, a graduate of our program who wanted to help us, and he just was here at the right time. And so Jeff played a huge role in making all that work too. Yes, Jeff?
So one of our move to folks from Seattle was one of those voices on the front row. The picture was from the papers. We got to share it with their grandparents back in Seattle. That was really cool. But
Awesome.
a few years ago, I was watching a PBS series of national parks, and I saw a name pop up there. It was Cook. And I texted you, and I said, hey, I just speak for the national park system. Can you tell us your move to story? How you got to Tennessee?
I will, quickly. So I've lived all over the country. My roots are in the Southwest. If I had to pick a hometown, it's probably Santa Fe, New Mexico. My dad was a National Park Service administrator. And so when Jimmy Carter signed the Alaska Lands Act and made in Alaska in the early 80s, it was like the Wild West. You could pull a rifle off your mantle and go shoot animals like there was no protective stuff. And so when Jimmy Carter signed the Alaska Lands Act, my dad was the first regional director of all the parks in Alaska, and he had the best job ever. But Jimmy Carter was a one-term president, and when the Reagan administration took over, they very much wanted to drill for oil in national parks in Alaska. My dad took exception to that, so they fired him. But you don't get fired in that world, you just get moved. So my dad got moved to the job he ended up loving the most of all his jobs. He was superintendent of the Great Smoky Mountains. And so I graduated we moved my junior year, so I went the second half of my junior year and senior year to Gatlinburg-Pittman High School. I love band, obviously, and so the Tennessee, UT right there, Dr. Julian, some of you will know that name. So I got recruited to go to the University of Tennessee. My when I was at UT, my professors would say, hey, when there's a concert, when all the bands come to Knoxville to play what's called Concert Festival, these are my professors telling me this in the early 80s, mid 80s, there's one band you have to go see when they come on stage in Knoxville, and that's Dobyns-Bennett High School. And so we'd be an undergraduate student, and every time Tyler Fleming brought the Dobyns-Bennett Band to UT to play, I'd be in the audience. So I knew about Dobyns-Bennett just that way. So then my first job out of my graduate degree was in Lynchburg, Virginia. So I moved to Lynchburg at E.C. Glass High School, and the first thing I learned when I moved, one of the first things I learned when I moved to E.C. Glass is all those folks remembered Dobyns-Bennett High School from a game that they played in the 50s that got snow. When the Dobyns-Bennett Band traveled to Lynchburg, snow came, and all the E.C. Glass parents housed the Dobyns-Bennett Band kids. And so I'm hearing about Dobyns-Bennett everywhere I go. So then in 1997, the job here came open, and I applied. I did not think I would get it. I found out at my interview that the two people I was interviewing against were legendary, like, band directors in their 50s. One from Atlanta and one from Columbia, South Carolina. Both guys that had national reputations. So I thought, well, this will be a neat experience. I'll interview just to see. And I think I got the job because I was the cheapest option. Because, you know, those guys had long careers and they had to pay them more money. So I do remember one of the guys who interviewed for the job said he didn't want it because he was scared. Some of you will remember the days where the band practiced at Indian Highland Park. And he thought the liability of the band crossing Center Street twice a day was more than he was willing to take. So I think he turned it down. And somehow I ended up with this job, and so 25 years later, here I am. So that is my how I got to Kingsport story. I think I've got, what am I supposed to be done in 1 or now?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Yes, Jerry.
Well, I just want to say that the years I've been in this region and so forth, I am so proud of Dobyns-Bennett and the band, without a doubt. But I think we all have to be very aware that it is because of Lafe. It's all about vision, leadership, directorship, energy level, my goodness, and trust. When I see these people looking at you, there's trust there. So I'm going to go a step forward, and I'm going to now name you King Lafe. I want it to be like King Richard. Any of you who have not seen the movie, please go. I went to see it just a couple of days ago, and honestly, it wasn't 10 minutes into that movie that I thought of you. And my children, and all of the children that you are so responsible to, that trust you, and what you have accomplished is amazing. Please keep it there, King Lafe. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Thank you. We should probably end on that.